Marius Borg Høiby, son of Norway's crown princess, has been officially indicted on 32 charges. This is 9 more than the original 23 that the police came out with. This is according to the state prosecutor in Norway. This is an incredibly serious case. We have some more details about his basically violent tendencies against women, how he would violate them in various ways, especially as they slept. Mark my words right now, this could undermine the future of Norway. I don't know if a monarchy is in Norway's future. So, we're going to share a little bit about what this upcoming case looks like and why Norway may be on the brink. But if you guys haven't been to Royal News Network before, my name is Brittany. I do provide compelling royal commentaries, so please hit that subscribe button. I would love to have you back. Now, normally we do a Crown Report segment here where I share news from the other royals, but August tends to be very slow, and this is going to be a very serious video and one that I think deserves its whole attention. And I will share a disclaimer here. There are obviously some disturbing details in this case, so maybe some viewer discretion is advised here. I haven't really actually ever had to do that before, but this case, I think, deserves it. And this case is exceptionally serious and very bad for the Norwegian monarchy and should be a rapidly flapping red flag to all the other royal families out there as to what can happen if you're not careful who you choose as your spouse. Now, I know we had the example of that in the United Kingdom with Meghan Markle, but there were a lot of red flags at the time of their marriage about Mette-Marit because she had a lot of connections to the party scene, the drug scene. And unfortunately, because of the case against Marius, her parenting, along with Hakon's, the crown prince, is being called wildly into question. And it raises some very concerning thoughts about Ingrid Alexandra and Sir Magnus, who are the children of the crown prince and princess. Ingrid Alexandra will one day be queen. How often and how much were they exposed to other half brothers' behavior? Because he was mostly raised in their house. He actually mostly lived on that same property. So, this case, as we go through it, you'll see why this is exceptionally serious. And if Norway, if the palace is not somewhat freaking out at this point, they should be. They honestly should be. Because in other royal families, when it comes to controversies and scandals, at least the couple that we've had in terms of changing the monarchy. So we have Belgium and Spain as our prime examples here. When the king left, he took the scandal with him. The problem here is that the scandal resides with the future king and queen, and by extension, raises some very serious questions about what is going on with Ingrid Alexandra, Princess Ingrid Alexandra, and Prince Sir Magnus. Because just last week or a week or two ago, Magnus was on vacation with his half brother and his father going to Portugal to have a boys' trip. Like, the sheer stupidity of that trip now, golly, it looks bad. Just looks optically so bad. But let's go ahead and get into this case. Again, some viewer discretion advised here. These are very serious charges. We have to maybe be somewhat, let's say, careful about the language here because the charges relate to violence against women in multiple ways, you could say. So this is from CO Corp. We'll also look at the Norwegian outlet as well, but this is a Norwegian outlet that is more, you could say, on the gossipy side, but they got a lot of good stuff here. So it says, over a year after his first arrest, the prosecution is finally ready for indictment. So what happened was the police came up with 23 charges, gave it to the prosecutor. The prosecutor has officially announced we're pursuing 32 charges. So again, 9 charges more. So they reviewed all the evidence given to them by the police. I believe this was given out in June. And now we have a kind of further announcement and some additional details about what Marius was doing. And it's genuinely very, very bad. So it says the police have conducted a thorough investigation with a large number of witnesses, several searches, and a review of extensive digital material. The investigation is now complete. So that was in June. And he was first arrested in August of 2024. So this is a year later. And it started with a violent incident at an apartment with it's been described as his girlfriend, but yet not his girlfriend. So I'm confused there. But, anyways, he had this violent outburst. And once that little door was opened, a flood of allegations came in afterwards. And they learned more and more that this was not a one-off incident fueled by alcohol and drugs, because he had like cocaine, alcohol, and maybe even marijuana in his system. I can't remember the exact, but this is a pattern of behavior, a pattern that his mother has been cleaning up, the future Queen of Norway, for a long, long time. So very, very serious stuff indeed. So it says he has committed damage and bodily harm, which he himself admitted shortly after the incident. In the months that followed, obviously, the details of the case emerged and grew in scope. And so this is a Norwegian site. And so Google automatically translates it for me from Google Chrome, in case you're wondering why it is in English. And yet you may still see some Norwegian here and there. So one of the women who was revealed as to be part of this case was a TV personality named Lenny Meister. She thought the police were calling her in for questioning to paint a more nuanced picture of her friend, who was Marius, but she was instead presented with a double-digit amount of evidence in which she herself was the aggrieved party. So a lot of this evidence against him they found on his phone and women coming forward. So these are all the things he's charged with. Yeah. So one case of with intercourse, 2 cases of without intercourse. I can't really say the word again, YouTube will demonetize it. 4 cases of sexually offensive behavior, 1 case of abuse in close relationships, 2 cases of bodily harm, 1 case of damage, 1 case of making threats, 5 violations of restraining order, 1 case of harassment of police officer, and 5 road traffic offenses. So the woman he assaulted, who is her right here, shared, "I can't understand that I would become one of his victims. I'm still shocked. I didn't believe it when the police showed me the evidence. I was completely shocked. I still refuse to believe it. It hurts so darn much. It was a betrayal." Was among the things she said. And so the other update that we got is that the case regarding one of his former girlfriends, Julian, was dropped. And so her claim wasn't successful, and she confirmed that she would not appeal the decision from the prosecutor. So that's her and Marius at an official event. And so in this case here, even though she was not able to kind of pursue her charges, there's plenty, obviously, of other evidence there. Because again, I feel like the Norwegian police would not be pursuing this case if they did not feel like they had a lot of solid evidence here, because this again is a huge profile. They actually, I think in this article, they said that, oh, even the German outlet was there. I'd actually wouldn't mind have been there, although it obviously would all be in Norwegian, so I wouldn't understand. But she wrote in a statement that the case was extremely burdensome and demanding to deal with, and she had prioritized her own psyche and health going forward. This is probably the case for several of the victims whose cases were dismissed, that the case complex has been so demanding to deal with that they chose not to appeal the dismissal in favor of some peace. So this is all the news outlets ready to get this reporting here. So the state attorney said he would have the indictment mid-August, and so it was the 18th. For 30 members of the press were there, including a German TV team. So the charges include 4 cases of and abuse in close relationships against a former partner. He is charged with several acts of violence, breach of peace, damage, and violation of restraining order against a former partner. And this is sort of the, you could say, big revelation of this most recent announcement, is that he is also accused of filming the genitals of a number of women without their knowledge or consent. Finally, the indictment also applies to a number of other matters, including death threats, harassment of police, and several traffic violations. In total, there were 32 charges in today's indictment decision. This case is very serious, and violence in close relationships are very serious acts that can leave lasting traces and destroy lives. The other penalty for the circumstances mentioned in the indictment is imprisonment for up to 10 years. And this is his mother right here with sort of the bleach blonde hair, and his stepfather. He's also clear that Holmby's connection to the royal household should have no bearing on the charges or punishment if he is found guilty. The state prosecutor says that all the in the case involved so-called sleep where the victim was not awake. So to me, and again, we had to bleep some of those words there, this exhibits a very particular pattern of behavior. This is not just, oh, something happened. Like, he obviously has a pattern. This is like a pathology. This is where it gets dangerous because yes, people make bad decisions in under the influence of alcohol or something like that. But to me, to violate somebody while they're asleep means that he has a particular thing he wants. And he has a particular, and it's like fetish or kink that he wants to enact. And part of it is probably both not having the victim's consent and having them be asleep and unable to respond. And so when they even say asleep or not awake, it could mean they're drunk. They're unable to consent for whatever reason. They've taken, let's say he might even drug. I don't know. Just spitballing, trying not to make it worse here, but just saying that he obviously has a pattern here. So this goes beyond, let's say, and again, people make horrible decisions. People can have a one-off incident where they make a terrible decision and turn their life around. This strikes me as exceedingly more serious, that it's a pathology, it's a pattern of behavior that he likes to enact. And there's severe danger there. Again, who knows what happens inside that home? You got to think about that. State prosecutor describes that in the videos, so that he probably took himself. Homie inserted a finger into one of the victim's genitals while the victim was sleeping. I will say something about the cases concerning violence and abuse of former partners. An indictment has been issued against Homie for the abuse in close relationships against Nora, and the basis for the indictment states in the following, I read, during the period of the summer from 2022 to the fall of 2023, in Oslo, Asker, Alta, Barbados, and other places, he abused his then partner, Nora Hokeland, through repeated violence, threatening behavior, and other offenses. And again, this pathology here and this pattern of violence, severely disturbing. Goes on to say the violence consisted, among other things, of him repeatedly hitting her in the face, including a clenched fist, choking her, kicking her, and grabbing her hard. On other occasions, he slammed a door in her face, slammed her hands into the wall, and pushed her into a refrigerator. This guy is violent. And his mother had to know this, and so does his stepfather. The royal household had to be aware of some of this. They were not unaware. I'm sorry, they just weren't. Holmby also allegedly threw objects at her, destroyed furniture by smashing cell phones and closet doors, and subjected her to repeated verbal abuse. He also allegedly monitored her whereabouts, who she spent time with, and what jobs she took. So we're having controlling behaviors, which again is not surprise. In the case of the Frogner woman, charges have been brought for individual incidents rather than a charge of domestic violence. These incidents include 2 separate incidents of violence that occurred: repeated strangulations, blows with the flat of the hand, and spitting in her face. For vandalizing her home, breaking objects, and disturbing her peace by contacting her several times after the relationship ended. A number of restraining order violations for filming and taking pictures of her vagina without her consent. The other charges in the decision, as mentioned, include violations of road traffic violations, harassment of the police, and death threats. The case will now be sent to Oslo District Court, which will set a date for the main hearing, i.e. a trial. No date has been set in advance for the main hearing, but based on signals we have received from the court, the defense attorneys, and legal counsel, is likely the case will come up in mid-January next year. It will be requested that 6 weeks be set aside for the main hearing, and that will be a huge case. During the trial, the prosecutor will present the evidence, and Homby will be able to answer for himself. It is up to the judge to determine what punishment is appropriate. Here, and this is from NRK. It says conditions for imprisoning Homby are not met right now. So they will not be imprisoning him right now, but maybe in the future. The palace on the indictments has just said it is up to the courts to handle this case and reach a decision. We have nothing further to add. And the question is, I think his mom may not be called, but if she is, she'll have to answer for one of the questions where he threw her under the bus going, well, I was cleaning myself up to be arrested taking a shower. My mom came in and cleaned my place. And oh, wouldn't you know it? Oopsie doopsie, my SIM card happened to disappear. It's not looking good for Mette-Marit either. So the NRK's crime department reporter said it is a very serious charge for counts of rape and abuse in close relationships. These are all serious charges, which also carry a fairly long prison sentence if he is convicted. And as the royal expert for CEO Court said, Caroline Vagel, this is the darkest day in the history of the royal family in the private sphere. But I disagree a little bit with that assertion because this is not just private. This is very, very public. It's hugely public and shocking. And from what we've gotten before, it seems like Mette-Marit and Haakon, at the very least, were well aware that Marius had serious issues and proceeded to sort of do nothing. And I say that because at one point there's a story that Marius and his girlfriend were having some sort of spat, or Marius was going crazy. I think, obviously we can put a lot of the blame on Marius here, to the point where Mette-Marit had to go down and try to mediate the situation. But they weren't just anywhere. They were on the literal royal yacht. On the royal yacht, mommy had to go down and calm down her son. And then I realize I'm being, let's say, a little rude and dismissive, but I think it's well deserved here. It's well deserved here. This behavior, it's not the result necessarily of parenting, because sometimes people have pathologies that are just innate to them. But what I think we see a decent amount of evidence of at this point is that Mette-Marit, I think, and Haakon as well, I don't know for what reason, they did not recognize who their son was and the danger he posed. And I think indulged him. I think covered up for him for years at this point. The man's not even 30 yet and still lived on mommy and daddy's property. He had parties at mommy and dad's house and trashed the house, which was a house given to them to live in, which is sort of their royal residence. It's not the palace, but it's one where the crown prince or princess lives. And a petrol card was stolen during one of the parties. Silver was stolen during one of the parties, which they only recovered because the auction house was like, hey, this looks a little suspicious. Maybe we should call the palace. And wouldn't you know, it belonged to the crown prince and princess. He brought Hell's Angels into their home to meet his mother. Now, I don't know the status of Hell's Angels in Norway, but basically all of Marius's friends were criminals. All of them. And as a result of all of this, serious, serious questions now need to be raised about what Ingrid Alexandra and Sir Magnus saw. What did those two kids see? Because they were allowed to be raised with him, to interact with him. At her 18th birthday gala, Ingrid Alexandra sang her older brother's praises and said how loyal he was and how much she appreciated him and all these sorts of things. And just a couple of weeks ago, Haakon took Sir Magnus and Marius out on vacation to Portugal so they could have a boys' weekend, before the other is charged with 32 criminal counts. Does that sound like a very bright thing to do for you? Now, obviously, I don't have a child in this particular situation, so I can't say everything. But this is not just about what they're doing personally. This is about publicly. What do the optics look like? The optics look terrible when you take a boys' vacation with a man who serially abuses women. It looks bad. Yes, he's still your stepson. Yes, support him as he goes through this in some way. But you also need to keep your distance too. No boys' weekends. Why are we having a boys' weekend? That's just ludicrous to me. Absolutely ludicrous. And again, what has Marius said, done in front of his younger siblings? Because there was a blind item, and I don't put a lot of stock in blind items at all. But given what we know about Marius, I would not be surprised somewhat if this is true or aspects of this are true. And it was particularly talking about Ingrid Alexandra, that she might be partying and might be dabbling in cocaine. Marius, was under the influence of alcohol and cocaine when he had his violent incident against his girlfriend. So, would it be surprised that he exposed his younger sister to cocaine, his younger brother to cocaine? I think it's entirely possible. And those kids might come out just fine. Maybe they'll be just fine. But the problem is now we have a long standing pattern of behavior that was not dealt with and now has resulted in criminal charges. And Marius has been allowed to have access to his younger siblings. And that is on Hakan and Mette-Marit. And not that they completely ostracize him or anything, but something has clearly gone wrong. And I'm not sure Norway completely weathers this storm because the Norwegian monarchy is actually very young. It's only a little over 100 years old. It's an offshoot of the Swedish monarchy. And you have the added situation of it's not like you can get rid of the king and the problem goes away. That's sort of what happened in Belgium and Spain. You got rid of the former king, a lot of the problems went with him. A lot of the scandals were surrounding the former monarch, not the new one. But in this case, once Harold's gone, what happens next? Can Hakan keep it together? Will one of the kids, his kids now go off the rails too? What have they been hiding and concealing from their other kids? Because I question their parenting. I severely question their parenting. And obviously, we won't know until later. And some people have said, well, you can't blame the parent for the child. I think mommy played a role here. I think stepdad also played a role here. I think everybody did in one way or another. I think their big role was probably enabling and hiding themselves from the reality of Marius's behavior. I think that is their sin here in this situation, if you want to call it that. And if any of their younger kids have issues, the whole thing might collapse. Because, and I hate to say this, because I think Hakan marrying Mette-Marit was a beautiful thing in many ways. Marrying a single mom, hey, I think that's awesome. I mean, it's so progressive as a world, especially back in 2001 when they got married. It was so progressive. It was so welcoming and everything. But there were a lot of questions of Mette-Marit at the time. She had sort of a rough family background. Her former boyfriend, Marius's father, was in prison for drug charges. And now, yes, there were a lot of questions. She sort of seemed to prove herself. But now we get to this. And you see all the questions from probably 2000 and 2001 being sort of vindicated down the line. That there was a good reason to ask questions because we see the end result, and the end result was not good. And although I, again, think it's wonderful for a single mom, a divorcee, anything like that to marry into a royal family, now we have the question of, but you see also the reality of why it's somewhat better to marry somebody without much of a past. Because Marius did not turn out to be sort of the beacon of hope. He's maybe the stone that sinks the whole ship. And Mette-Marit and Hakan only have themselves to blame, I think, in some ways. Something, obviously, I think some of it is, obviously nature and nurture also all played a role here. But I think the future of the Norwegian monarchy is on very shaky grounds. They almost have to try infinitely harder to keep it now because they're the problem. They better hope Harold lives for a really long time because without him and Sonia as a buffer, you're just left with Hakan and Mette-Marit, whose son, when they become king and queen, might be in prison for, I mean, golly, this is unbelievably bad. And to give context or greater context to the scandals in Belgium and Spain, in Belgium in particular, it was an illegitimate child. She was trying to sue to claim legitimacy, basically. And so she was able to achieve that. And she's, sort of been on the peripheral. I think she wants a greater royal rule, doesn't not understanding that, that's just not going to happen for her. So she's a bit of a wild card. But then in Spain, it was the king was having affairs, engaged in financial scandals and those sorts of things. And the king, former King Juan Carlos, his son in law, was actually imprisoned for tax evasion. And so you have financial scandals and let's say a personal scandal here, but this one is very different. It's a criminal scandal of violence against women, a pattern of violence against women. This is not one time when you're drunk and you do something insanely stupid. Not that any of that excuses that, but you have a guy who exhibits what I would consider sort of a pathology of a serial offender who is not going to get better, most likely, without severe intervention. This guy is not going to get better. He has a taste for it. He was always probably going to escalate it too into more violence. I mean, you could be looking at a guy who's a potential serial killer here. And I say that with a level of seriousness here. This is exceptionally bad. And Norway, this is their make it or break it moment. How they handle Marius will determine the future. Because Marius was still on the royal website until after he assaulted a woman. And they knew before then, when he was on the royal website, he was assaulting women. They knew that. They knew he had issues. The mothers of his girlfriends would try to tell them about it. And they sort of buried their heads in the sand. You can't bury your head in the sand anymore. Your previous actions in this case, I guess I'm speaking metaphorically to Hakan and Mette-Marit. Your decisions before haven't worked. If you want to keep the monarchy, you're going to have to make some tough decisions here. And that means, yes, Marius is always part of the family. I do feel like that there's a level of importance there. But you have to get him away from his younger siblings, and you have to recognize that he has serious, serious issues. Don't excuse this as just drug use because that's not what this is. This is a pathology, maybe fueled somewhat by drugs and alcohol, but this is a serious pattern of behavior where he likes to be violent and violate women. They have to actually take this seriously. Stop brushing it under the rug. Stop ignoring it. Your son is basically, well, he's innocent until proven guilty. But I think we have enough evidence here to say there's likely a pattern of violence against women. One that you guys have conveniently ignored until it became so huge it could destroy the life as you know it. And so they have to figure out how to address this. There needs to be crisis talks at the palace. How do we deal with Marius? How do we keep him separate? How do we make sure that he's not escaping his rehab in London like he did allegedly last year? We need to make sure he's not partying it up in Nice, going to Italy as if nothing is wrong, like nothing has happened, which tells me that he has no concept of how bad things are, that I don't think his parents are dealing with it seriously enough. And they probably have the purse strings here. But they knew he had criminal friends. They knew all this stuff. And they let it go on. And now you might have a monarchy or you might not in a couple years in Norway, or a couple decades, I should say. It all depends on what the future holds. And they better pray that Ingrid Alexandra is going to come out of this well. Because if she doesn't, I think it's all over. And I feel like that's incredibly sad to say. In Norway, if you told me 5 years ago or asked me which monarchy I thought it was on the brink, Norway would have never been on my list. And maybe, again, I'm being too negative about the situation, and that could totally be. But, oh my goodness, things are getting bad. So we shall see what this holds. Again, we'll be watching this whole trial. I'm actually hoping to have an idea for doing, let's say, a long form kind of analysis of this whole case and trial, because obviously I've covered it from the beginning, but I want to go back through and give you guys more. So, because I want to understand how this scandal happened and give, let's say, lessons for monarchies in the future. Because if other monarchies are not looking at the situation and freaking out, they should be. They should be looking at the peripheral members. They should be aware. And Sweden, in some ways, the Swedes are very closer. The Danes, they need to keep their distance. Honestly, keep somewhat the distance here, because this is not good for anyone. So, guys, let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what you think of this case against Marius. I'd love to get your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall speak to you again very soon. Bye.